Hello, boys and girls. Today we want to talk about powers of 10 and what it means to multiply and divide by powers of 10. Something that's very important to know is that powers of 10 just represent our place value chart. But we're going to be talking about moving up and down our place value chart by multiplying and dividing by these different powers of 10. So to start with, we need to understand what a power of 10 is. A power of 10 means the number 10 multiplied to a certain exponent. Remember that exponent represents repeated multiplication. So in this circumstance up here, this means that I'm going to be multiplying 10 together 3 times. 10 represents our base. 3 is the exponent. Therefore, this represents 10 times 10 times 10, which I know equals 1,000. I can also associate this with moving up or down the place value chart. 10 to the third power tells me that's equal to 3 place values. Since each place value represents a group of 10, and you move up the place value chart every time you get 10, having 3 sets of 10 doesn't mean having 30. That would be 10 times 3, not 10 to the third power. Instead, it represents you have 3 times 10, that amount of times. So 10 times 10 times 10, which equals 1,000, which, like I said, is 3 place values since you regroup every 10. So if I come down to my next example here, I'm multiplying by a 10 to the power of 4. I know that 10 to the power of 4 is going to represent 10,000. Your clue is that the exponent can also represent the number of zeros when being multiplied by 10 because it is 4 increasing place values. So I'm going to take my number 6, which is currently in the ones place, and I need to move it up 10,000 or 10 to the fourth power or 4 place values. You can think about it in all of those different ways. So I know that 10,000 times 6 equals 60,000 because I have 6 groups of 10,000. In this last example, we're actually going to be dividing by a power of 10, which means our number is going to move smaller to the right in our place value chart. So in my number 1 and 4/10, my 1 starts in my ones place. It's going to get 2 place values smaller because 10 to the second power represents 100. So if I'm starting in my ones place, my 1 needs to move down 2 place values, which means it will now be in my hundredths place. Something that's really, really cool about powers of 10 is that your digits don't change. Because I start with a 1 and a 4, and they are within 1 place value of each other, my answer is going to have a 1 and a 4 within 1 place value of each other. So I know that my 1 needs to be in the hundredths place because that's what happens when you moved it down 2 place values or divided it by 100. Therefore, my 4 can't just disappear. It's going to follow that lead. Since my 4 started in my tenths place, it's going to move 100 place values. It's going to go down to the thousandths place. So when I divide 1 and 4/10 by 100, I should end up with 14 thousandths. Notice how in both of my examples, the number I got at the end still had that same digit that we started with, or digits. It's very important that we notice however many digits I started with in that order is what I should end with, but they're going to be in different place values. So now I want you to go back to your notes that we've already previously taken, and I want you to check your work. So these were some notes that we already had about multiplying and dividing powers of 10. I want you to notice that in each one of these problems, we are starting off with a number, and we are multiplying it or dividing it by a power of 10. And each time we go down this chart, our power of 10 is increasing because I want to notice that pattern. So if I start with 9 and 400ths and I multiply it by 10, all of my digits are going to move up the place value chart one place value because I'm multiplying it by 10, which means my 9's in my 10's place and my 4 ends up in my 10th's place. That 0 placeholder still follows right along in between the 9 and the 4. Multiplying it by 100, or 10 to the second power, moves it up 2 place values to get 904. Moving it up 10 to the third power, or 1,000, I should have a 9 in my thousands place, 0, 4 following suit behind, which means I have to have that 0 in my ones place as a placeholder to show my reader that my answer is 9,040. Multiplying it by 10 to the fourth power, or 10,000, I'm going to have 90,400. I need another placeholder because as my digits move up the place value chart, you have to make sure that there are zeros in those place values where we don't currently have a digit, but that are in my number. And my last one here is 9 and 400ths times 10 to the fifth power, which means my 9 is going to end up in my hundreds, thousands place, and I'm going to have 3 placeholders on the end. So I hope that you see the pattern here as you move your digits up the place value chart, and I hope you're realizing we still have this 904 in that order throughout the problem. We are just simply adding placeholders where they are needed. Now coming over here to divide by powers of 10, it's the exact same process, but instead of moving our digits up to the left, we're going to move our digits back to the right. So I'm going to get 10 times smaller here, which means my 6 ends up in my 10ths place and my 3 ends up in my 100ths place. So when I take 6 and 3/10 and divide it by 10 or get 10 times smaller, I end up with 63/100. Now if I divide it by 10 to the second power, or 100, they're going to be moving down 2 place values, which means I still have, as you can see, my original 6 and 3 attached to each other because they're following the same pattern, but now I need a placeholder in front of my numbers because that's where we have a missing value on our place value chart that needs to be filled. Following the same pattern, I'm moving 10 to the third place value, 10 to the fourth place value, and 10 to the fifth place value. As you can see, my digits remain the same as we go throughout. Oops, I just changed the color. Oh well. And I add those placeholders in the place values that are needed to tell my reader what answer I get. So now you need to go back on Google Classroom and fill out your 5-question Google form.